practices sin. There's a little bit of difference in what I said, and my version actually didn't say that. I changed it just to have a point of discussion. There's a difference, isn't there, between sinning and practicing sin, isn't there?
You starting with verse 3?
No, verse 9?
Practicing makes it sound like you're trying to get good at it.
Well, yeah, that's true.
It really works there.
Well, and the truth of the matter is that we probably get a little bit better at it than we should. But there is a difference between practicing sin and sinning. So let's go back and read what it says there in verse 9. It says, "No one who is born of God will continue to sin or practice sin because God's seed remains in them. They cannot go on sinning because they have been born of God." And one translation doesn't say that they have been born of God. It says they are born of God. So the implication here is very plainly that the person who practices sin, let me just go back to it. What is the significance of the terminology of being born of God?
We obey and baptized.
Okay? And so when that happens, we say, well, we've been born again, right? And so when you are born, when you're born physically, you come into this world, you have an identity, you arrive in your parents' arms. I mean, 3 years later, you're still born, aren't you? You're still living, right? In other words, that birth took place, but you're still living. And that really is the implication here when he says that anyone who is born of God, he cannot continue to sin, cannot continue to practice sin because they cannot go on sinning because they have been born of God. They are still a child of God, right? So is that the case that if we practice sin, or if we, as he describes here, he says they cannot go on sinning because they've been born of God? How do you explain that? If you were up here in my place, how would you teach that concept?
If you fall away from God, then does that count you're not born of God?
Well, let's take the prodigal son. He's in relationship with his father. He decides that it's time to go out on his own and take his inheritance, and ends up squandering it. During that period of time, is he acting like a son? He's not, is he?
He severed his relationship.
Right. And so, in essence, the father always knows that the son is out there, that he's alive, but as far as the relationship is concerned, there is no father-son relationship in that situation, is there?
And I think the question we need to ask on the sin is, what type of sin is it?
Mm-hmm.
If memory serves me, this is in the Greek, it's present active.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a continual action, this sin is, which we reference
Right.
practicing sin back and forth.
Thus the terminology of the one that goes on practicing sin or remains in sin is the way that some translations talk about it. Because it's a problem, isn't it? If this is implying that anytime you sin, you're not born of God.
I think you just feel more guilt. After you become a child of God, I felt more guilt and ashamed of things that I had done before that I wasn't really ashamed of before I become
Right.
a Christian.
Well, but that's a situation though that we need to consider is, after you became a Christian and you feel that guilt and that type of thing. I don't think that that is the sin that this is talking about. I think if you became a Christian, you said, sin's no big deal, I'm going to keep doing what I was doing before. And, there's no guilt and there's no remorse and there's no regret, any of that stuff going on with you. In other words, what you're doing is you're continuing to practice sin. And what Kathy said a moment ago, we kind of chuckled at, but that's kind of the situation, because if we continue to practice sin, that's a part of our character, a part of who we are, then that's where we are no longer born of God. But if we continue to practice righteousness, and is anyone perfectly righteous? No, we're not perfectly righteous either, are we? But if someone goes on practicing righteousness, that's their desire, that's their intent, the characteristic of their life, then as Abraham experienced the imputation of God's righteousness into his life because of his faith, then that's the same way that righteousness is imputed to us, not because we live a righteous life from the standpoint of perfection, but that's our heart. That's our intent. And I think that that's important for us to kind of lay that groundwork from verse 9 and following. He goes on to say in verse 10, it says, this is how we know who the children of God are and who the children of the devil are. Well, how do we know?
By their actions.
By their action, yeah. I mean, how do you know the children of one family from the children of another? Well, they look different, and probably they are going to be a reflection of the way that their parents behave, their environment points them in that direction. And so that's basically what he says. He says, anyone who does not do what is right is not God's child. Is there ever a time when you don't do right?
Bob, it would seem to me that we would have to think of this in terms of relationship rather than physical connection. Because no matter what I do, where I go, or how I behave, I will always be the child of my parents. And it seems to me that this is more about my relationship with God rather than just the birth, my being born again of God.
Right. And yet, if there was a time when you decided, I no longer want to be the child of my father or my mother, and I'm severing my relationship with them, then that's really what we're talking about. You no longer are a daughter of theirs. You become something else. And that's the implication here, is that the practice of sin and the characteristic of unrighteousness in our lives brings about the situation where we are no longer God's child. And that's the reason for us to kind of hone in, if you will, on this concept of being born, is because that birth doesn't just happen when we are baptized. That's where it happens initially, obviously, but it's also a relationship that we enter into that is ongoing, and that we still have that choice, as we had the choice when we became Christians to become a Christian. Then we also have a choice to shape our lives in a direction that, quite honestly, as he describes, he says, if you don't do what is right, you're not God's child. I mean, that would be pretty telling, to the doctrine of once saved, always saved.
Hey, Bob, would that be kind of like adoption? If you adopted and you run away from them, same as being a Christian.
Well, yeah, it could apply to adoption or natural birth or anything, but yeah, that's the implication. So, as he continues there in verses 11 and following, he also, I believe, lays that groundwork for a life of righteousness versus a life of sin, of practicing sin, of ongoing sin, of unrepentant sin, versus a life of righteousness, a life that is lived with the intent of living a righteous life, even though we do sin and fall short of the glory of God. And he's covered that back in chapter 1 very adamantly, hasn't he? And so, but here we are in this situation, and this groundwork is being laid in regards to all of that as he leads into another aspect of what is kind of a point of demarcation when it comes to our being children of God. And so in verse 11 he says, "For this is the message you have heard from the beginning, we should love one another. Do not be like Cain, who belonged to the evil one and murdered his brother." And why did he murder him? Now, let's stop right there. Why did he murder him? Why did Cain kill Abel?
And the jealousy.
He was jealous, right? Anything else?
Yeah, he lost the seed.
Huh?
He lost the seed which is the word.
Uh-huh.
Which is if you follow that path, it's to your choice.
Uh-huh.
But if you don't keep God or the seed, the word in, you will fall away.
Okay, yeah. Let me ask you this. Have you ever been in a situation where maybe you were with some folks that were practicing sin, and you'd made the choice of not participating in whatever it is that they were participating in? You can fill in the blanks with that. What happens when that situation exists, when you're in the presence of someone and you choose to not sin when people right next to you are choosing to sin? What happens in that situation?
They're gonna pressure you to sin. They're gonna start working on you. Come on, this is not gonna hurt anything.
Mhm.
You know, one time, come on, let's just do this, okay?
We
Just,
also make them uncomfortable.
right, that's why they do it.
Exactly. That really is the bottom line of the situation, is because the Bible talks about it in a lot of different ways. What does darkness have to do with light? Yeah, it does.
Light exposes darkness.
And if light exposes darkness, what does darkness think of a light? Don't like it, really? Isn't that the case? I know it's been my experience. There have been bunches of times that I've been in situations where everybody else was drinking, and I chose not to drink. And they didn't like it. I mean, they really didn't like it. And I said, I'm not going to try to talk you out of doing what you're doing. I'm not going to do it. Because if I had tried to talk them all out of it, I mean, we're talking about a unit of firefighters that had just gotten off duty, and that was their way of celebrating the afternoon or whatever. And and got to the point where, because of the friction that was created in that situation, I didn't stay around. I left. But as long as I was there, it almost seemed like an indictment against their behavior. And I do believe that what we're talking about here from the standpoint of having an influence on those around you can really be a problem. And I think that was the situation with Cain, is that because Abel did exactly what God wanted him to do. Cain, well, what did Cain do?
Offered the wrong stuff.
Do what? What did Cain do?
Cain knew what was right to do. He
Mhm.
knew what God wanted.
Mm-hmm.
He just didn't want to do it that way.
Okay, so what did he do?
He made his own decision.
He did what Cain wanted to.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, and that's the point that I was trying to make, is that Abel did what God wanted, Cain did what Cain wanted. And that's really the bottom line. And so here is his Abel, again, going back to that scenario that I was describing, here is Abel doing the right thing in the right way. And here's Cain saying, I'm going to do it my way. And the way that Abel was doing it was making Cain uncomfortable. Thus comes the jealousy, to the point that he took actions against his brother. And so it goes on to say, because of his own actions, because his own actions were evil and his brothers were righteous. That's really where it boils down to. And that's one of the things that, as long as we are trying to practice righteousness in the world, there is always going to be conflict. There's always going to be that conflict between good and evil, that conflict between right and wrong, between righteousness and sin. Goes on in verse 13, do not be surprised, my brothers and sisters, if the world hates you. Do you ever get that feeling? Do you believe the world hates you? I mean, get out in social situations. Do they hate you?
Depends
Not
on where
openly?
you are.
Huh?
I guess it would depend on where you are.
Depends on where you are and who you are and maybe the circumstances. But, you know, quite honestly, sometimes we might get into those situations and we don't think that they hate us. They just don't like us very much.
It's very evident that they don't like you, whether hate is the word they have in their hearts or not, but it's very evident that the uncomfortableness that Cheryl talked about, that just makes you, you have no place being there.
Right.
You know, what
Right.
you feel.
Yeah.
But on a large scale, we see the hatred in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
On a larger scale, the individual person may not always see it that way, but they hate a lot of things that we stand for.
Mm-hmm.
And culturally, you see it, politically, you see it coming pretty strong these days.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what did Jesus say about? He just said, in a broad scale, that politically in every way, the hatred toward righteousness is very evident. And I think that's basically in a nutshell what you said. But anyway, what did Jesus say about this conflict between good and evil? What did they say that would happen in his situation? He says something like, they're going to hate you because what?
Hated him.
They hated me. They hated Jesus.
And I think the word hatred can definitely be described as far as the Jews. I don't think there was anything less, because murder was in their hearts.
Mhm.
Okay? You know, so you had to be more than just not liking something. I believe it was hatred on the Jews' part.
Yeah.
As I don't know I don't think every Jew, but the
Mhm.
overall perception of the overall main
Right.
leading body of the Jews at that time, for sure.
And again, I go back to it, and it basically seems to me that the ones that hated him were the ones that should have known better. That they were the righteous, or the self-righteous, if you will, that should have known better.
Hey, Bob,
Yeah.
John 14:17. No, I got it back at 17:14. I have given them thy word, and
Okay, yeah. Another situation in which he was describing the hatred between good and evil. Look at 1 John chapter 3 and verse 14. He says, we know that we have passed from death to life because we love each other. Anyone who does not love remains in death. Wow. Anyone who does not love remains in what? Death. Anyone that does not love? Well, that's okay, right?
Separated.
I
You're separated.
I can love them. I just don't have. I can like them, or what is it?
You can love them, yeah, you just don't like them.
Yeah, you can love them, just don't like them, right? I mean, when we're talking about the kind of love that he's describing, I do believe that he's basically describing among fellow Christians. But also, if we have that kind of love for one another, well, let me back up. What if there is that absence of love between Christians? Do you think that that's something that's going to be enthusiastically shared with someone who is not a Christian?
Verse 15 answers that.
Answer my question first, and I'll answer yours, okay? Do you think that if we live among ourselves and there's not the presence of agape love, do you think that that's something that we're going to openly and enthusiastically share with someone who is not a Christian if we struggle with our love among those who are Christians?
No, when they come to visit, they see that.
That's what I was
And
gonna
that
say.
would repel them.
If a stranger walks in, they can tell if we love each other or not.
Exactly.
Besides that, we're commanded to love each other. And going back to what you said a while ago, I love them, but I don't like them.
Mm-hmm.
If that is our attitude, I love you, but I don't like you, how can we have the heart of service for that person or look to that person's best good?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're commanded to encourage, we're commanded to serve, we're commanded to look to each other's best good. And I don't think we can do that if we love them but we don't like them.
So let's get into that a little bit. So I like Cody, and I love Cody as a brother. And so how am I going to prove it? How's Cody going to know if I both love him and like him?
How do you treat them?
Yeah, how I treat him, right? And so let's back up, okay? All of a sudden, Cody makes me mad, and I don't like him very much. I love him as a brother, but I don't like him.
Do you not like him or you don't like what he did?
I don't like him.
There'd be a difference in the way you treated him.
Huh?
Be a difference in the way you treat him.
Exactly. And so the evidence, again, it goes back to the evidence of how I treat him, right? So how is love manifested? That's a big word. What is manifested mean? Shown. How is love shown if I sit back and say, well, I love him, but I don't like him. I love him, but I don't have to associate with him. I love him, but I don't have to put myself in his presence. I love him, but this. But there's always that line of excuses that we sometimes use, quite honestly. That we can say, well, I love him, I love these people, but I just don't want to be around them.
It's funny because I've said that before. I know that's awful, but I love them, but I ain't inviting them over for supper.
And I guess there's probably some validity to that. But at the same time, okay,
Bob, you can pick your ways, though,
Huh?
in that situation. You can pick your ways of
Okay.
service to them, okay? Not everybody in this building at this time, in this moment, is gonna get along with everybody else.
Uh-huh.
We're not. But you can pick the way that you want to be of service to that person, even if you have trouble liking that person.
Mhm.
You can still pick a way that they can see a love from you, okay?
Okay.
I don't think they're gonna be your best bosom buddy that you're gonna share all of your deepest feelings with. But that doesn't mean that you can't be of service and show love to them, okay? Whether, you know,
You can grow to love anybody though. There have been people I don't care
Well,
for
you can
that I'm
change
friends with now.
and see, that's a
I married
point
him.
that I think, I didn't hear all that you said, I don't know if I wanted.
I raised my hand
I
up
just
when
said there's been people that I didn't start off just really wanting to hang out with or liking, but you can grow to love people. You practice
People
that.
grow on you, don't they?
Yes.
Yeah, you can wear them down too.
Yeah.
Make them like you.
But here's the thing, I'm going to still pick on Cody. Cody gets on my nerves, so I don't want to be around him. I love him like a brother, but I don't want to be around him.
What are you gonna do when you get to heaven?
Well, he's going to be on one end.
I think the Bible says you still need to talk to him.
Okay, all right.
that's what.
But here's the thing. What if,
Do we have to
and
talk
this has happened to me, relationally, this has happened to me. Some guy that I couldn't really stand to be around, we were forced into being together for a while. And had a little bit of commonality. We were trying to get a job done, and we were working together side by side. That guy ended up being one of my best friends. So, how do I connect this? I started out with loving a brother, and I can't stand him. And all of a sudden, through the process of time and experience and being together, becomes one of my best friends. How does that fit into the situation of love being an absolute in our Christian relationship? We say, well, I have to love them, but I don't have to like them. Well, but what if you gave yourself an opportunity to like them? What if you said, it's not going to be about me, it's going to be about the fact that God loved me when I wasn't very lovable. And He accepted me when I wasn't very acceptable. So what would happen if I just began to accept a brother or a sister that I don't get along with very well, but who knows? Maybe if we just communicated, maybe if we just spend some time together, we could overcome that and become the brothers and sisters relationally that God is wanting us to be.
Well, maybe we can pray that your attitude towards something changes.
Yeah, I could pray that God changes her.
Oh, no.
No, but your point is valid. We can pray and say, God help me.
Yes.
Help this to work out.